Poor girl marries a 70-year-old man. 10 days later, she uncovers his secret. The morning sun bathed the dusty village outskirts in a warm golden glow, but for 12-year-old Amara, there was no comfort in its light. She stood barefoot on the creaky wooden floor of her grandmother's hut, wearing a fragile white gown that had once belonged to another's daughter. The veil scratched at her skin. Her eyes were dry, not from a lack of sorrow, but because her body had already exhausted all its tears. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Women whispered to one another. Men turned their gaze elsewhere. They all knew what was about to unfold. She was about to marry Mr. Simon Westbrook, a white man nearly 6 times her age. A 70-year-old stranger from a foreign country, a different world, with a life so distant from hers. A man who hardly spoke the local language, whose silver hair and cold eyes unnerved her, and whose handshake felt like ice. But he had money. And Amara's family had none. 2 weeks ago, her younger brother had fallen ill, fever, chills, uncontrollable seizures. The local clinic refused him care without upfront payment. Her mother begged, pleaded, sold her sewing machine, her wedding ring, even Amara's school books. But none of it was enough. That's when Simon appeared. He was staying at a private lodge up in the hills. An old American businessman, they said. No one knew why he was in the area. He didn't speak of charity or missions. But he had cash. And when he saw Amara walking barefoot through the market, buying medicine with spare change, something in his gaze lingered. The next day, he visited their home with an offer, a bride price large enough to cover her brother's treatment and still leave enough for food, rent, and clothes for the year. Her mother had screamed, refused, thrown things. But by nightfall, her brother's fever worsened. They had no choice. And Amara, still a child herself, had whispered, "I'll do it." The ceremony was simple. Her grandmother tied a thin string of beads around Amara's neck. Simon, dressed in a black suit, gave a faint smile. When asked if he took Amara as his wife, he only said yes. She said nothing in return. There was no kiss, just a nod. And then silence. That night, Amara sat on the edge of a pristine bed in a strange guest house. Simon sat across from her, reading a book in a language she couldn't understand. He didn't come close. Didn't touch her. He simply handed her a bowl of soup and said, "Eat." It was the first time he spoke directly to her. His voice was soft, too soft. It confused her. He slept in the room next door that night, locking the door between them. Amara stayed awake, clutching a photo of her brother, wondering, what does he want from me, if not what all the others whispered? The following days were the strangest of Amara's life. She expected cruelty, silence, submission. But Simon treated her like glass, not fragile out of pity, but valuable. He gave her a room of her own, brought her soft dresses in gentle colors, served her tea with honey and a small linen-wrapped cookie at exactly 4 p.m. each day. He never touched her. Never raised his voice. Never looked at her like the others did. And that made everything feel even more unsettling. She didn't know what to expect anymore. On the third night, Amara peeked through a crack in the library door. Simon sat in his usual armchair, reading under the warm glow of an old lamp. But this time, he wasn't reading. He was staring into a mirror. Not shaving. Not brushing his hair. Just staring. His face was weary, paler than before, his lips trembling slightly, as if whispering something under his breath. Amara couldn't hear. She backed away, unsettled. The next morning, Simon invited her to walk with him through the woods behind the lodge. He handed her boots, a scarf, and a notebook. "You should write," he said. "Even if it's just your thoughts." Amara squinted. "Why?" "Because stories help make sense of things," he replied, then added quietly, "and I think you'll need that soon." The way he said it, like he knew something she didn't, made a chill run down her spine. By the 5th day, Amara noticed something else. Simon kept a room locked at the far end of the hall. A heavy wooden door with a brass handle that wouldn't turn. She asked about it once, and he gave a faint smile. Some doors aren't ready to open yet. But Amara wasn't a child anymore. She had been poor. She had seen death. She had already lost her innocence the day she wore a wedding dress meant for a man 3 times her age. So that night, while Simon was out in town, she picked the lock. Inside, she discovered a hidden collection of secrets. Photographs covered the walls, children, dozens of them. Some smiling, some not. Each with a date beneath it. Some dates had an X through them. Some had none. In the corner of the room sat a wooden trunk, inside which were more notebooks, letters. She pulled one out. Dear Maria. You're probably 17 by now. I still think about you, your laughter. I hope you kept playing your violin. I'm sorry I had to leave so soon. Another. Dear Rosa. The stars were always brightest when you sang. I hope you found your family. I hope you never stopped singing. And the latest one, fresh, almost a week old. To Amara. You don't know yet, but you will. I just hope I live long enough to see you smile for real. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She clutched the paper tightly. Her name was there. Why had he written her a goodbye letter before she even knew it existed? She turned around and nearly screamed. Simon stood in the doorway. He had come back early. His expression wasn't angry, just weary. I suppose it's time you knew, he said. Amara clutched the letter to her chest. Knew what? Simon leaned against the doorframe, exhaling deeply. I didn't marry you for me, he said quietly. I married you for you. Amara stood still, frozen in the dimly lit room, the letter still gripped tightly in her hands. The heavy air was filled with the scent of cedarwood, and something else. Faded memories. Simon stepped into the room and gently shut the door behind him. He didn't scold her for unlocking it. Didn't ask why. Instead, he walked over to one of the photos on the wall, a girl in a yellow dress, laughing, arms spread wide under a tree in bloom. Her name was Noor, he said softly. She was from Egypt. She had a stutter. But when she recited poetry, it was as if the heavens spoke through her. He smiled briefly, but it didn't last. She died at 14. Malaria. Her village had no clean water. He pointed to another photograph. Lian. From China. Abandoned at birth. I paid for her surgeries. She dreamed of becoming a nurse. She didn't survive either. Amara's voice quivered. Were all of them girls you married? No, he answered firmly. They were girls I found. Girls in danger. Girls sold, forgotten, discarded. I didn't marry any of them. He turned to face her. You're the first. Amara's eyes narrowed. Why me? Simon sank into a chair, releasing a sigh that seemed to carry decades of regret. Because you were going to be sold anyway. You just didn't know it. Her heart sank. I heard rumors. A foreign businessman, a Russian, had been buying girls, younger than you. Your family was in debt. He was going to come with an offer. Amara stumbled back. You're lying. I wish I were. His voice cracked, just barely. I had only 2 options, let him get to you first, or get there before him. Amara stared at the photographs again. These weren't trophies. They were memorials. For the next hour, Simon told her everything, how he had spent the last 20 years traveling the world, finding vulnerable girls in desperate situations, orphans, street children, abandoned daughters, and doing what little he could. Sometimes he paid for their schooling. Sometimes he built wells. Sometimes he adopted them legally. Other times, the system blocked him. So he worked quietly. Silently. Off the record. Amara interrupted him once. Why not use your wealth publicly? Start a charity. You're wealthy, right? He smiled bitterly. I was. I sold most of it to fund these efforts. But even money has limits. When the law favors the rich and punishes the poor, I learned that the only way to help girls like you, trapped in forgotten corners of the world, was to be there myself. He looked her in the eyes. I married you because it was the only way I could buy time. To protect you. To give you a choice, one you never would have had. That night, Amara didn't sleep. She sat by her window, her legs drawn up to her chest, the letter still in her hand. She thought about the life she almost lived. About the quiet American who gave her freedom instead of commands. A pen instead of a cage. A choice instead of chains. And then, she understood something that made her heart ache. He didn't save her because he had to. He saved her because no one else would. The next morning, Simon wasn't at breakfast. Not by the garden bench. Not in the library. Amara knocked gently on his bedroom door. No answer. With trembling hands, she opened it. He was there, peacefully resting on his side. Pale. Quiet. Still. Gone. Doctors later said it was congestive heart failure. Simon had known it was coming. That's why he was in her country. That's why he moved so quickly. That's why he chose her. He had been dying. And he didn't want to leave this world without giving one last girl a second chance. Inside his bedside drawer, Amara found a sealed envelope addressed to her. Amara. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But that's okay. I've lived my life. Now it's your turn to live yours. The smell of paper and ink lingered in the room as Amara stared at the envelope in her trembling hands. Simon Westbrook's words, though simple, resonated deeply within her heart. You'll find the documents in the study. Your name is now on everything I own, land, savings, property. But the most important thing I leave you isn't money. It's freedom. Don't waste it. Amara's tears had long stopped flowing, but now they came again, unbidden, slipping down her cheeks. It wasn't fear that moved her, but an overwhelming sense of love and loss. Simon had never been a traditional father figure to her, but he had been something more, a protector, a guide, and above all, a man who had seen the potential within her that even she had been blind to. He had saved her life, yes, but more than that, he had given her a choice. He had offered her freedom when none seemed possible. The truth settled deep within her chest, a weight, yet somehow a comfort. She had been given a chance to rewrite the narrative of her life, to turn the page of the story that had always been dictated by poverty, fear, and submission. It wasn't just the land or the wealth, it was the knowledge that she could now make decisions for herself. She could decide her own fate. But the realization didn't come without its challenges. She felt the enormity of what had just been placed on her shoulders. Amara wasn't prepared for this kind of responsibility, not yet. She had just barely stepped out of childhood, her innocence still clinging to her like the dress she wore, old and faded. And yet, Simon had trusted her with everything he had, knowing full well that he might not be there to guide her through the complex world that awaited her. In the days following Simon's death, the news spread through the village like wildfire. At first, it was hushed whispers among the staff in the estate, a solemn phone call to a lawyer in the city. But then the rumors spread, and within hours, the gates of the lodge were surrounded by people, some curious, some hopeful, others skeptical. Amara stood by the window, gazing out at the people who had once regarded her with pity, or worse, with indifference. Now, they stood at the gates, some with flowers in their hands, others with questions in their eyes, though none dared ask them aloud. What did Simon's death mean for them? Would they finally be able to exploit the wealth of the estate? Would it bring them the riches they had always dreamed of? But it was Amara who held the key to that future, and she understood, even in her young mind, that things could never be the same again. The villagers, those who had once dismissed her as nothing more than a poor orphan girl, now saw her as something entirely different. She was a symbol of power, of change, of potential. The first shock came when the lawyer, Miss Barrow, arrived with a black car rolling through the gates. She carried with her a sealed portfolio containing Simon's will, handwritten, notarized, legally binding. Amara could hardly believe what she was hearing as Miss Barrow read the contents aloud. Amara, just 12 years old, was named as Simon's sole heir. The villagers were stunned. Some whispered blessings, others muttered curses. Amara's mother, too overwhelmed by the news, fainted in the yard. The elders met in secret, their whispers growing louder as they tried to understand the implications of Simon's will. Children pointed from the alleyways, their small fingers jabbed toward the estate as if they could grasp the riches that lay beyond the gates. How could she own the land now? She was nothing but a poor girl last week, one man grumbled. He only married her to trick the system, another woman hissed, her voice filled with venom. It's witchcraft, someone else murmured, their eyes narrowing as they watched Amara from a distance. But Amara said nothing. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She simply listened, her heart heavy with the weight of the words she had just heard. She had been given something she could hardly comprehend, something that seemed far beyond her reach. But the power she now held was not something she had asked for. It had been thrust upon her, and she had to figure out how to carry it. Inside the lodge, she sat alone in the grand library that Simon had once filled with books and knowledge. The silence in the room was deafening, yet Amara found a strange comfort in it. The vastness of the space, the endless shelves of books, the smell of leather and parchment, it all felt like Simon was still there, his presence lingering, watching over her. For the first time, she felt a sense of ownership over the space, over her life. She had her own bed now, her own books to read, and a set of keys that opened doors to rooms she had never dared enter before. The walls were no longer just walls, they were hers. The house, the land, the fortune, it was all hers. The decision, now, was hers to make. The days passed slowly, the weight of her new role pressing heavily on her. But on the third day after Simon's death, Miss Barrow returned. She came with a folder of transition documents, explaining the steps Amara would need to take to secure the future of Simon's estate. The lawyer spoke gently, her tone reassuring. "There's enough money to last you through university and beyond," Miss Barrow said, her eyes soft with sympathy. "You don't have to decide anything now. But we'll need to appoint a guardian to oversee the estate until you're of age." Amara looked up at her, her brow furrowed with confusion. "Do I have to leave?" she asked softly. Miss Barrow blinked in surprise. "No, my dear. This house is yours. Simon made it clear, you can stay as long as you like." Amara's heart raced. She could stay here. The lodge, the library, the quiet solitude, everything could remain the same. The life Simon had given her, the life she had lived with him, could continue. But was that enough? Was she content with simply maintaining the status quo? No. She knew she wasn't. Amara had always been more than a passive observer in her own life. Now that she had the power, the freedom, the responsibility, she knew she couldn't simply sit idly by. She leaned back in her chair, the truth washing over her in waves. She had her own choices to make. She had a future to shape. And she would not waste the opportunity that Simon had given her. The first decision she made stunned everyone. She opened Simon's ledgers, the books that detailed every transaction, every investment, every donation Simon had made throughout his life. She read them carefully, taking note of the places he had visited, the people he had helped, the projects he had funded. It was clear that Simon's wealth had never been about accumulating riches for himself, it had always been about helping others. Amara felt a deep sense of gratitude for Simon's quiet, unassuming generosity. He had lived his life in service to others, and now it was her turn to carry that torch. She instructed Miss Barrow to withdraw part of Simon's remaining funds, not for herself, but for the children of the village. She ordered the clinic, which had once rejected her brother when he was gravely ill, to be repaired. The staff there had turned their backs on her family, but Amara would not forget the debt they owed to the village. She had the funds to make it right, to provide healthcare for those who couldn't afford it, to ensure that no child would ever be turned away again. Amara didn't stop there. She had a school built in the very place where she had once sold herbs in the dust, trying to survive. That space, once a place of desperation, would now become a beacon of hope for the village's children. Education would be the gift she gave to them, the key to their own freedom, just as Simon had given her the key to hers. But Amara's most important decision came with a single rule: any girl under the age of 14 would no longer be married off. The village's practices of selling young girls into marriage had to stop. It was an unspoken tradition, something no one dared question. But Amara knew that the future of the village lay not in its adherence to outdated customs, but in its willingness to change. Her decree was met with resistance. The elders grumbled, the men scoffed, and the women whispered behind closed doors. But Amara stood firm. She was no longer the powerless girl who had been married off against her will.